I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm carrying out this video interview of Ian Johnston and John Barlow in my capacity as chair of the Secretariat Committee to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. I am also, however, the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which provides the Secretariat to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. Ian and John, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to have this conversation with me. Of course, you are involved in this conversation because you are representing a group who are involved with the R2I Action Group. The R2I Action Group have submitted a written response to the All-Party Parliamentary Group's call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. And as you know, today you are representing that group in your response to the questions that I'm going to be putting to you, which are, of course, the same questions that have been responded to in written format by way of the submission that's been provided. The recording of this video, once edited, will be placed onto the APPG's website, and alongside that will also be the written submission made available as a download. We will then be doing what we can to draw attention to the video and the written submission by way of social media. And of course, your submissions will also be included in the formal report that is being prepared by the All-Party Parliamentary Group. We've organised things such that you're going to be taking it in turns to respond to the questions. This is actually the first time that we've had two individuals involved with a video interview. But as I say, we've organised it so that you can take things in turn. Ian's going to be dealing with the odd numbers and John with the even numbers. But for the first question, which I'll come on to in just a moment, you're both going to be responding to that. So that's everything. The scene has been set, as it were. Could I please ask you, first of all, Mr. Ian Johnston, to introduce yourself and tell everybody how you got to become involved with Ready to Invest, or abbreviated to R2I. Talk about what it's meant to you individually, and of course, tell everybody about how you first came to interact with the Financial Conduct Authority, and then I'll put the same points to Mr. John Barlow to respond as well. Ian, over to you first of all. Thank you.
Well, I first came involved with Ready to Invest. I think it was about 2009, I think it was. I was looking to buy property abroad and I came across Ready to Invest. Now, this was an investment in Eastern Europe. My investment was in Montenegro. It was called the Country Funds. There were four countries, Croatia, Montenegro, and well, three countries, Croatia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. I put my money into Montenegro. Now, I did quite a bit of research into this. Looking back, I was very naive. However, I do not believe I was stupidly naive. And I'll tell you why. Because I trusted the system whereby you invested in this. The people involved were the husband and wife team called the Crossicks, who were basically ready to invest, or ready to rent as they were then. They became ready to invest. They were co-promoted by a firm called Burlington's, and your money was not given to the Crossicks. It was put in a trust fund in Jersey called Equity Trust. Now, that made me think that my money, I was wanting to know, how do I know my money is safe? How can my money not be misappropriated? If it was put in a trust fund and managed by a trust fund, how can your money be stolen by the Crossicks? It made sense to me. I did my research into Burlington's. I went down to the Burlington's office. I could see that they were obviously a very successful firm. I spoke to some of the Burlington people who praised Jonty Crossick up to the nines. I also contacted someone else independently who had dealings with Jonty Crossick, and again he was praised up. What came out that house? I also phoned. I used to get a property magazine called Property Investors News. I phoned them, and they told me again that their dealings with Jonty Crossick, with Jonty Crossick advertising with his company, with their magazine, and I was told they'd never come across any of them. Oh dear, can you hear me?
Yeah, just carry on, Mr. Mr. Johnson. Thank you. Carry on.
I've lost you. They'd never come across any of the more thorough. I also researched Montenegro. Montenegro was the second biggest tourist place in the world. You know, and the place that had the most tourist growth in the world, second most. The property there, the land there was cheap, but land was going up very quickly. It was on to a winner, and it ended up a complete and utter mess. But nothing was built, and it just ended up a mess. And but before I realised that this was all, in my opinion, a con, what happened was that I kept getting emails from Ready to Invest, and they were building a leisure centre in Val do Ico in Argentina. This was advertised as a very, very, very upmarket place that had been going on for a number of years. It seemed to me to be a winner. I did know that some of the things that Ready Invest had done hadn't worked out, but this obviously was one that seemed to me that was going to work out. The reason being, going on for so long, and they were just about to start building there, but they needed some money in order to continue. And if you gave them a certain amount, they, in a few months' time, would give you money back with 20% extra. They were about to find out who the lenders were. They were looking for lenders. I put my money in, I think it was in February, and you were to get your money plus the interest back in August. This never happened. Various phone calls to Ready Invest, and they were just about to get the money. The money was just about to come in, and nothing ever happened, and I lost all that. My original investment in Montenegro, it turned out to be a mess. There were 3 people who were very clued in and very tenacious, and they fought and fought for a number of years. I got all my money back. Some people didn't get any money back. Some people got some of their money back. If it wasn't for these 3 people, who I have tremendous respect for, I would literally have lost everything. I did not believe that in a country like Britain, where we have our sophisticated legal system, that people could put money into an investment and it go missing and nothing would happen. I then since then discovered that what the Crossex did is that they started up ventures, took the money off people, promised to give them their money back, promised them they would get this or that, and then nothing would happen. They would take their money and they would just move on and do the same thing again. They did this over a number of years. No one knows exactly how many millions they have stolen, but it is reckoned to be well over £100 million have been stolen from people. If anybody would have told me that in this country that could happen without any redress, I would not have believed them. And I think probably I may have been naive, but I think probably the vast majority of people in this country would be naive, because I think the vast majority of people in this country would agree with me. However, I've since then discovered that this does happen, and I think it is terrible. And I am doing this interview because I want for this to be redressed. The Val do Ico was marketed as an extremely upmarket place. The rich Brazilians would be going there. John de Crossex, being so thorough, had all this worked out. It was just going to be a marvellous place. Golf course, country club, golf course, fly fishing, polo even, vineyards, tennis, yoga, meditation centre. It was supposed to be a great place. very well marketed with a very plush brochures. Of course, nothing ever happened. I believe there were 85 investors put into Valde Eco, and £13 million was put in by these people, all of whom have lost all their money.
Ian, thank you very much indeed for introducing yourself and explaining what you have so far. That's excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. John Barlow, could I please invite you to introduce yourself and talk about how you first came into contact with the R2I Valde Eco situation and what's happened to you? Thank you, John.
Yes, John Barlow, retired stage and screen director. I first became involved with R2I in 2006. I had seen a lot of print and media advertising, but things like large posters in the London Underground, very favorable articles in places like the Telegraph, the Mail, about their business. I looked into it, and they had a very good track record in UK development investment, and they were now moving into, on the basis of their success, foreign property investment. The first thing that came to my attention was an off-plan development in Morocco, Marrakesh, which Morocco is a country I'm very fond of. I've been to many times, and I thought it would be a nice investment in terms of retirement property. So I got involved with them at that point, which was seemingly a time at which the FCA was already being advised that there were scurrilous activities within the company, but made no attempt to deal with. Anyway, I then in 2007 and 2008 made two further investments with them on land and a development in Eastern Europe. And then finally in 2008, shortly after the death of my father, which left me with an inheritance, invested in Valde Eco, because it was a very attractive proposition. I have friends in the wine business who were very familiar with Mendoza, and the plot of land that they were seemingly developing had a good location. There was nothing untoward in terms of their pricings and in terms of the sureties they were providing. They mentioned that they were negotiating with a major American investor who subsequently turned out to be either have mafia links or be a complete crook himself, which was no surprise. So on hearing that the company was going out of business, I immediately contacted Fraud Action and built up a case with them, giving them all the information that I had about my particular case. And then subsequently, about 6 months later, got in touch with them again. A year later, got in touch with them again, and each time had a very desultory and non-committal response that nothing was clearly going on. Because of the R2I action group, sorry.
It's okay, John. Just carry on. Thank you.
Hang on, I just want to make. Sorry, I'm trying to turn that off now. Yeah, owing through the formation of the R2I action group, I then subsequently got in touch with the FCA and told them of my position, and got a very non-committal and negative response from them, saying that I was out of time, even though it appeared to me that they had been in neglect of duty. And so I've been pursuing it since then, with contacts with the CC at the FCA, who has given me a full and complete response, which again was negative and unhelpful and didn't address the central issues. So that's how I happen to be here today in the hopes that this in some way may excite a more serious and a broader interest in bringing the Kozacs to justice and preventing things like RCI happening again.
John, thank you very much indeed, and thank you again, Ian, for your piece earlier. Gentlemen, there's a couple of paragraphs in your written submission that I think set the scene very nicely in terms of what actually happened. With your permission, gentlemen, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read them out pretty much word for word. Of course, the full written submission will be available for people to see on the website once it's all uploaded. And then, John, I'll then ask you, please, to cover off question number 2 for us, okay?
Yep.
Before we get to question 2, let me just read out a couple of the paragraphs in the written submission. The interaction with the FCA dated back to 2010 or even earlier by the R2I Investor Action Liaison Group in connection with the misappropriation of investor funds and other serious irregularities relating to the R2I Jersey Property Fund investment scheme. Detailed submissions, including supporting evidence, were sent to the FCA Enforcement and Financial Crime Division regarding a €100 million alleged fraud relating to the R2I Jersey property funds and linked vehicles from 2010 onwards. However, no response was received from the FCA, and it became clear that the FCA had taken no tangible action to protect retail consumers from further harm and stop the financial crime that was still taking place. A formal complaint was sent to the then FSA CEO, Martin Wheatley, in May 2014 for failure to take action against R2I for over 4 years or even longer. The complaint stated, and I'm reading this out verbatim, the complaint stated, "The matters set out in our submissions represent apparent serious fraud through which investors have lost in excess of £100 million, potentially much more. We are concerned that, with the exception of the minor disciplinary action by the FCA against 2 peripheral individuals to date, and the further investigation that we understand is ongoing, little or no serious action has been taken to address the primary issues, nor to further compensation of the wronged investors, or to prevent the perpetrators from continuing to unveil new victims." That's the end of the quotation. We do not have any record of the FCA addressing this complaint. I'm also going to read out the next paragraph pretty much word for word, just to make sure that everybody understands the context and the history here. More recently, the R2I Valda Uco Investor Group has raised similar concerns with the FCA about serious alleged fraud in the Valda Uco investment cases. In 2017, our group received bank statement evidence that showed the R2I Valda Uco investor funds had largely been misappropriated, as only a small proportion of our funds were transferred to the entity that was managing the Valda Uco project. The FCA, R2I liquidators and the insolvency service were informed of the serious irregularities. The R2I liquidators accepted there were serious irregularities, which they had not identified during their investigation. We also filed complaints against the 2 banks that had been involved with us in the facilitation of the serious economic crime and alerted the FCA accordingly. During 2018 and 2019, further complaints were filed with the FCA about R2I carrying out regulated activities without FCA authorization. Following the emergence of evidence regarding the FCA's knowledge about the serious alleged fraud involving R2I before the Valda Uco scheme was even marketed, a number of the R2I Valda Uco Investor Group investors filed a complaint against the FCA for regulatory failure. So, Mr. John Barlow, could I please invite you to pick up and cover off question number 2 for us? Thank you very much.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I was referred to the FCA by the R2I Investors Group after having contacted Fraud Action and had absolutely no help from them. and they had apprised me of the FCA's responsibility in relation to consumer protection. I contacted the FCA with details and all of the background to my case, also indicating that reasons for having a degree of confidence in the company, partially due to due diligence, partially due to the supposed setting up of escrow funds through banks like Barclays and HSBC, which then later turned out to be fraudulent. Their response was slow, vague, and evasive, and really completely unhelpful. And they posed their response in such a way that they invited me to respond to it with further information. That led nowhere, and that was when I then went to proceed the matter through the Complaints Commissioner, who then informed me after a long period of time, and again a sort of cat and mouse response answer scenario, that I told his answer was basically that that I was out of time, and I then pointed out that they had been derelict in their duty very early on, and so there was a bigger issue than the time scale in which people applied to them, and also that there was a question of how and when information about R2I came to light, in terms of the investors knowing about it and being able to react towards it. I was, my main point, which has still not been addressed, has been that they had information about R2I carrying out regulated activities from informants, not professional informants, but informants from a range of professions who would have been well informed, and they failed to take any account of this and to act upon it, which would have, had they done so, alerted investors like myself and saved us a great deal of money and pain. In the early days, in 2006, 2007, in addition to things like checking Company House and looking at what was available in the media and through any other sources that might have been related to R2I, there were online searches, and I did that extensively, and they didn't turn up any information detrimental to RTI. Now, I think that the FCA should have, in some way, been doing something to alert the public and potential investors that there were questions about R2I's activity.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Ian Johnson, if I could please invite you to turn your attention to question number 3. Question 3, briefly tell me about your interactions with the FCA.
Well, I had no interactions personally with the FCA. My interactions were all through the R2I Liaison Investor Action Group, who sent detailed submissions to the FCA from 2010 onwards. This appeared to be one-way traffic, as there was no feedback given from these. Due to the fact that this is obviously a very, very serious situation, the Action Group was extremely disappointed with the FCA, and quite rightly, who seemed to take no interest in the wrongdoing, and continued, and the consumers were constantly put at risk. Because of the lack of tangible action against the former, a formal complaint was raised with the former GCO, Martin Wheatley. That's the former GCO of the Financial Services Authority. We raised concerns with him. They, however, they were, however, ignored. Also, that what was happened is that there were 2 banks that were obviously in breach, and no action was taken against them, despite us telling them about that. there was MPs, people contacted their MPs and wrote letters to the MPs, and Mark Stewart, the Executive Director, Enforcement and Marketing Oversight, was reported, and he was sent a standard letter. Mark Stewart stated that the FCA had suspicions that RTI were engaged in fraud, but failed to take any action to investigate the business model. They were told and did not do any action. The FCA then said that they believed that the R2I could be operating unregulated in collective investment schemes, but stated that there were significant jurisdictional hurdles. This obviously was not an acceptable defence from our point of view, as it was quite easy to establish that Ready to Invest were engaged in unlawful regulated activities. Complaints were also put to the FCA in 2020 for failing to take action against Ready to Invest when they knew there were serious irregularities that put customers at risk. There was also a similar case with a company called LCF, and they knew about this, but however, they were obviously doing things that were not correct, and FCA, the Federal Financial Conduct Authority, were informed about this. Nothing seemed to have been done. The Financial Conduct Authority Complaints Commissioner reviewed the complaint, but concluded that she could find that it should have been filed earlier, which seems to me a very lame excuse. She said that she had some sympathy with us, but did not accept the conclusions, which I think was totally inaccurate.
Thank you. And let's now go to Mr. John Barlow to deal with question number 4. Question number 4, Mr. Barlow, is what have your dealings with the FCA been like?
Most unsatisfactory. I think the principal issue is that the negligence of the FCA allowed R2I to continue marketing illegal schemes from 2006 to 2013. And had they actually taken any action about this, they could have stopped numerous investors losing millions of pounds. In contacting the FCA, their responses have been slow, difficult, and they've been what I would describe as impossible to deal with. Their responses are confusing, obscure, and uninformative. One would have thought that we, the investors, were the transgressors and not trying to make life difficult for them. They consistently, and even through the Complaints Commissioner, refused to take any responsibility for not acting in the case of R2I, conducting regulated activities, even though they had been informed of this going on at a very early stage. The FCA has publicly a statutory responsibility to protect consumers from financial crime, a duty in which they have been notably lax on several major occasions, LCF and Blackmores being further examples of this.
Thank you, John. Mr. Ian Johnson, question number 5 for you. Question number 5 is, have you ever witnessed any actions or conduct that breached the code, law and policy?
Yes, the Financial Conduct Authority is in a serious breach of their statutory duties of protecting retail consumers and reducing financial crime under the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000, and later under the Financial Services Act 2012. The FCA failed to take action when they had knowledge of serious fraud allegations involving Ready to Invest and its directors in 2007, when investors were sent details from submissions from 2010 onward. The red flags were very, very obvious, and they did not follow up any of this. The Financial Conduct Authority have failed to provide sufficient information to the ready-to-invest liquidators relating to their knowledge of the Jersey Fund scandal. Although that it was also a complaint was put in about the liquidators, because the liquidators would appear not to have done their job, and admitted and later on admitted that there were certain things that they did not uncover. The financial services also, they failed to provide sufficient information to the retail consumers that harm was simply that the harm was done with its alleged fraudulent activity. If an unregulated entity is involved in alleged fraud, there is a very high risk that the entity is also carrying out unlawful regulated activities without FCA authorization. The problem is that the financial conduct authorities fail to enforce the regulatory code, and have therefore been in breach of their statutory duties as set out in the FSMA 2000 and the FSA 2012.
Thanks, Ian. Mr. John Barlow, question number 6 for you. Have there been any interactions with the FCA that have been helpful?
No. It's taken a great deal of time to get a response from either the FCA or the Complaints Commissioner, and the correspondence between myself and them has been unclear and failed to address the central issues, which is that had the FCA taken action between 2006 and 2013, a great deal of RCI's corrupt activities could have been halted, and investors spared a great deal of pain. So I would say that they have not only been unhelpful, but they've been very defensive and evasive about their responsibility in all of this. They've still not addressed the concerns from the outstanding complaint that you referred to in your opening quotations from 2014, and that's a big issue as well.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Mr. Johnson, number 7 for you. What are your thoughts that the FCA lacks the powers that it needs, or does it not make use of the powers that it already has?
I've done a little bit of research into this, and there are people who have dealings with the FCA who believe that their powers are actually inadequate. However, it does seem to me that the main problem is that it doesn't make use of its existing powers. And I say this because there was a significant investigation done by Dame Elizabeth Gloucester into this, and that was her conclusion, was that they did not make use of their powers. There's also been a significant failure in the Enforcement and Oversight Division and the Unauthorised Business Department, where fraudulent entities operate around the perimeter, so represent a significant risk to retail consumers. The Financial Conduct Authority has not adopted an appropriate risk-based approach to the perimeter, as this is where the highest concentration of financial crime and risk to retail consumers is.
Thank you, Ian. And now, Mr. John Barlow, question 8 for you, which is, have you experienced any difficulties or shortcomings in your interactions with the FCA? Of course, John, you've already touched on some of this a few times, so feel comfortable with a short answer if you wish to give a short answer. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. As I said before, the FCA has taken little interest in the plight of R2I members, in spite of numerous representations. Ian and myself are only 2 of a body of people who have been consistently fighting this case for several years now, the hope is that their responsibility will be brought home to them, and that in the ideal world, some sort of compensation might be forthcoming.
Thank you, John. While I remember it, a couple of times earlier, John, you made reference to fraud action. My belief is you actually meant action fraud. Am I correct in thinking action fraud is what you meant to say?
Yes, absolutely right. I did mean action fraud. Sorry, it's been quite a while since I gave up any hope of them doing anything. So the name gets a little bit jumbled.
I perfectly understand. I just wanted to clarify that for the record. Thank you, John. Mr. Ian Johnson, number 9 for you. Have you experienced the FCA being reluctant to give clear answers to questions?
I would say that this is undoubtedly the case. The Valdo Echo should never have been allowed to have gone ahead. The reason being is that because of the frauds in the country funds and the other things that the Crosses have done, which the Investor Action Group have reported to the Financial Services Authority before Valdo Echo took place, that if they had dealt with that, there wouldn't be this mess in Valdo Echo in Argentina. They seem to be very reluctant when approached to give any answers to these. They also believe that they had no responsibility for financial crime as the key part of their statutory responsibilities, which I think is absolute nonsense, because that is what they're there for. They're there to take responsibility. Some concerns were also raised in the Financial Services Conduct Authority's operating model in the Dame Elizabeth Gloucester's report.
Thanks, Ian. John Barlow, number 10 for you. What do you think about the culture of the FCA?
I think it's inefficient and ineffective. There are information silos, there's poor communication between departments and very poor communication externally as well. Their attitude is one of self-sustaining self-interest, and they are defensive and opaque in their communications. They're not collaborative, and they're dismissive and disrespectful of being approached by investors whose interests they should be representing. Their biggest recurring failure is a failure to take action on information received in a timely fashion. There was one particular case which I'd like to refer to, which the organization came up. The FCA Complaints Commissioner Anthony Townsend, one of their own people, upheld a complaint against the FCA on a case where they had the regulator had intelligence about an unnamed firm from several sources for more than 6 months without taking any action. I believe the action that they took after 6 months was to put a trainee in charge of examining the case, and it was something like 9 months before they actually did anything further. The investigation into the firm was carried out with a lack of curiosity or sense of urgency, according to Mr. Townsend. The FCA said this was not an isolated incident, the FCA said this was an isolated incident, but Townsend said the evidence that he had seen suggested this was not the case, and there were, quote, wider problems in the team. If the FCA had accepted these findings and taken steps to address these concerns, LCF, for a case in point, might never have happened. So there seems to be a reluctance to seriously and significantly challenge firms when this should be one of their primary duties.
Thank you, John. That was particularly clear. Thank you. Mr. Ian Johnson, number 11 for you. What do you think about the possibility of conflict of interest issues at the FCA?
There appear to be conflicts of interest. What would seem to happen is that a person can be working for the Financial Conduct Authority and then change jobs and work for a bank or some organisation that they have been regulating. This is clearly a conflict of interest, where a person can be in one side one moment and the next side another moment. This self-regulate themselves. This self-regulation does not work, as the regulator's main role appears to be the protection of firms that regulates. So if a person is working for the Financial Services Authority regulating a company, he cannot be totally objective if they then start to work for the company that they were supposed to be regulating. I would say that's I think as much as I've got to say in this.
Thank you, Ian. Mr. John Barlow, number 12 is for you. Do you believe there should be spot checks by the FCA?
Yes, consistently and regularly, but most particularly whenever they receive information from informed sources that there may be something irregular going on within an organization, particularly in the case of companies who may not be seen to be carrying out regulated activities, but who in fact, like R2I, are carrying out regulated activities illegally. I also personally feel that there should be some sort of due diligence pre-registration form as companies set up new projects, so that the FCA can be apprised of the way in which companies and the areas in which companies are acting. There should be a checklist of red flags to assess the risk that is being passed on to retail consumers. Receiving intelligence on an entity, regulated or not, should at least be investigated, and so that action is open to stem illegal activities. And I think there's a need for these actions to be taken out by trained and qualified staff, and not for trainees to be given significant responsible duties.
Thank you. Number 13 is for Ian Johnston. What positives are there about the FCA that you'd like to comment on?
Well, I think that we have the FCA in the first place is very, very positive. I think there are inadequacies in it, which hopefully that we will help to change. But the FCA principles in the FCA handbook are actually well structured. It also has power to protect retail consumers in certain aspects of financial crime. And they have taken action in some cases and been successful where unregulated entities have been carrying out unregulated activities without FCA authorization, such as the asset land scheme, where an unregulated collective investment scheme was operating without FCA authorization. Also, the very fact that the FCA allowed Dame Elizabeth Gloucester, the KC, to do this review was, I think, a positive thing. Dame Elizabeth Gloucester proved to be fiercely independent and conducted a robust and fair assessment of the flaws in the Financial Conduct Authority's regulatory scheme in the respect to way in which the FCA managed serious fraud allegations that have been received from third parties. An effective framework is in place so that there may be quick and cost-effective ways of highlighting Dame Elizabeth Gloucester's KC's report. Many of the FCA problems and therefore solutions are believed to be cultural, but there needs to be a change in governance to remove the conflicts of interest. The FCA needs knowledge that implementing the solutions will ultimately benefit all parties and act as a serious deterrent to potential fraudsters. There was the former Financial Conduct Authority Complaints Commissioner, Anthony Townsend, was prepared to challenge the FCA. This is obviously a good thing, and this provides some trust and confidence that there was a governance process taking place. The only concern is that the FCA was defensive and failed to address some concerns that were raised by the FCA. Had it been more receptive, many retail consumers would not be in this bad situation. My feeling is I don't really want anybody's head to roll. I think that there's been good things in the FCA, but I think the fact that there were times where they should have acted and didn't act, that this should stop, should be put to this. And though that there are good things with the FCA, these flaws should be brought out into the open and a system arranged that these flaws can't happen again. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ian. Mr. John Barlow, question 14 is for you. The question is, if you could change 3 things about the FCA, what would they be?
Yeah, there was a suggestion within the group that perhaps in order to ensure that the FCA behaved in a robust and timely fashion, that there could be a board of governance set up to oversee it. But that seems to me to be problematic, because you just create tiers of bureaucracy. And if one creates a regulatory body like the FCA, they should be trustworthy enough to act on their own authority. So that's one point. I think that they need a much more responsive and action-oriented approach, and that they should be take serious any fraud allegations that are brought to their attention, and act upon them in more diligently and more speedily. The second thing is that they need to be more transparent, they less confusing and less opaque, and better engagements with the financial experts who bring information to them, as well as better collaboration and a more respectful approach to investors. The third thing I would say is they should be prepared, or albeit humiliating, to take responsibility when they don't act properly, and when they make mistakes, because the cost of the mistakes that they make are incredibly high. So those are the principal things that I would put forward for them to look at in the future.
Thank you, John. Now to Ian Johnston. Ian, the FCA is undertaking a transformation project. Do you have any comments about that?
I think in many ways it's very good. I think the fact that we're supportive of the recommendations of Dame Elizabeth Gloucester, I think that's good. We also support the proposed amendments by the TTF in the Financial Services and Marketing Bill and Markets Bill. I think that a historic financial redress scheme should be set up for the victims of regulatory failure, defined where the FCA has been warned of serious fraud allegations. And I think in our particular case, what I find appalling is that the Crossix have done those things. The Financial Conduct Authority knows this, but yet the Crossix are still in business. I think something should be done with the law or with the FCA that this cannot happen. I think the historic redress scheme should be financed from those who committed the economic fraud. And I think that really is saying that the Crossix themselves should be paying for this. Unfortunately, the millions of pounds that Jonty Crossix has stolen, nobody knows where it is. However, whoever they should be held accountable for what they've done. This, I think, would improve the FCA's reputation and send a strong message to those who commit economic crime and those who facilitate economic crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. The last question, number 16, I'll put to each of you in turn. First to John, then to Ian. Mr. John Barlow, the last question for you, sir, is: are there any other comments that you would like to make?
Yes, I think that the R2I investment schemes and the fraudulent activity that they entailed have been badly let down by regulators, government agencies, and regulated entities who have turned a blind eye to the serious alleged fraud. The failure to act on the knowledge that was available in 2006 and 2007, and then again in 2010 onwards, resulted in victims facing significant and avoidable financial loss and obviously significant emotional pain. Dame Gloucester's report on the LCF has made enough information available and provided enough guidance as to how things might move forward in a more robust fashion. And I think that the advice that she has given should be considered seriously and followed. It's hoped that I would hope that the FCA would be prepared to address the concerns of the R2I constituency, and that they will set up future more rigorous system of regulatory supervision that will prevent something like this happening again. And I think that's apart from that, the points that I've made earlier on are things that I would like to be taken seriously.
Well, Mr. John Barlow, that's the last time you're going to be speaking in this video interview. John, thank you very much indeed for your contribution today. And of course, your comments as well as Ian's are augmenting the written submission that we would urge people to also read, that will also be made available on the APPG's website. John Barlow, thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you.
Now, last chance for you, Ian, to say anything you'd like to that you haven't yet already covered. Thank you, Ian.
Well, what I would really like, I would like justice to be done. I would like the Crosshairs to be tried. I would like everybody who invested in all the investments in Ready to Invest to get their money back. As I have said, I don't think how this can possibly happen, but I think that's what I want to happen. And I want a system to be developed whereby the things that have happened can simply never happen again. I think that the Dame Elizabeth Gloucester report has been a very good thing. I think that could precipitate change. However, my own opinion is I think that the government itself should actually take action and review the whole Financial Conduct Authority and see where these flaws are. When the Financial Conduct Authority have failed and then we have reported that failure, they cover their back, they don't answer questions. This actually, although I think it is awful, I do see their point of view. I don't expect anybody to be perfect. And I do think probably most of the people who work for the FCA are probably decent, sincere people. But I just feel as if that the system should be made whereby if a mistake is made, they may not necessarily have their heads rolling, which is probably why they cover themselves. I think a system should be put in place whereby they can be totally transparent, and if they make a mistake, they can move on and rectify the mistake. I think really that's basically what I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Ian Johnson, thank you. Once again, John Barlow, thank you as well. So just to be crystal clear about what's going to happen next, the video will be edited, put onto the APPG's website alongside the written submission that yourself and your colleagues on the R2I Action Group have produced. There'll then be a report written by the APPG, which will take into account the 170 plus written submissions that we have received. And hopefully that report will lead to the kind of changes that you two gentlemen have been speaking about today. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.